The bounty of our harvest is exceeded only by our dreams of what we can be and by what we're able to share. At Thanksgiving, we take time to be thankful for what we have.
In the early 1900s, when industrial America needed huge quantities of steel, it looked across the Great Lakes to Minnesota's rich iron range for the ore to make that steel. But when the ore ships reached the rocky western shores of Lake Superior, their compasses refused to read properly because of the masses of iron ore, both in their holds and on the shore. Ships were driven off course onto the deadly rocks and crushed. To prevent these tragedies, Split Rock Lighthouse was built north of Duluth, Minnesota. 310 tons of building materials were brought by ship and hoisted 124 feet up an almost inaccessible cliff. The result is one of the most picturesque lighthouses in America. Today, visitors can enjoy the lighthouse, its history center, and the surrounding park. Split Rock Lighthouse.
Antiques. They come in all sorts of shapes and sizes. But in Lake Havasu City, Arizona, they've got an antique to beat them all.
That's right, and it's sitting right over there.
Now, what is the London Bridge doing in Arizona?
London sold the London Bridge because it was actually sinking into the Thames an inch every 7 years, and it wasn't wide enough for the traffic.
And how did it get there?
London Bridge was shipped from London by ship into Long Beach, California. From Long Beach, California, it was trucked up here to Lake Havasu City. 54 truckloads of granite came into Lake Havasu. It was put back up exactly as it was taken down, stone by stone. Not every city has a London Bridge in their backyard, but we do, and we're proud of it.
The art of the Native American often reflected the environment from which it came. The Arctic region reflected long winter nights working wood and stone into imaginative forms. In the northwestern region, vast cedar forests supplied wood for some of the most spectacular wooden art ever developed by the Indian. In the southwest, there is a rich variety of art expressions from pottery to silver. The vast plains region provided animal hides, which were fashioned as wearable art. Beautiful wood and stone carvings are also common. While in the northeast region, craftsmen used native hardwood, twine, and antler to produce finely woven and carved works of art. The southeastern artists used their skills to create the elaborate patchwork, which formed brightly colored dolls and clothing. With the introduction of new materials by the settlers, a whole new world opened up for the Indian artist. We have much to learn from these artistic pioneers during American Indian Heritage Month.
Elizabeth Lucas Pinckney had a life much like that of Scarlett O'Hara in Gone with the Wind. She lived in a mansion in South Carolina, and in 1739, at the age of 17, Elizabeth was put in charge of a 600-acre plantation, an ailing mother and a younger sister. Instead of being overwhelmed, she rose to the challenge. She grew ginger, cotton, and alfalfa, then tried raising indigo, a crop that had not been successfully grown anywhere in the country. The blue indigo plant is used to make dye for cotton and ink. Lacking a domestic supply, colonial clothmakers had to import it from France. After several setbacks, Elizabeth produced a successful crop. She distributed the seeds to other planters, and soon, because of Elizabeth's determination and hard work, a new industry was born, producing America's own supply of indigo. Elizabeth Pinckney, a story of American ingenuity.
Less than 6 months after Pearl Harbor, the Japanese fleet began its second push in the Pacific. The Japanese were intent on capturing the Midway Atoll, annihilating what remained of the U.S. Pacific Fleet. What the Japanese hadn't counted on, however, was the skill and determination of the American naval forces and the expertise of its fighter and dive bomber pilots, men who attacked effectively, without hesitation, against tremendous odds. Men like the young aviator from Oregon, Lieutenant Marion E. Carl. A section leader in a Marine fighter squadron, Carl led an attack against a much larger force of aerial combatants. Carl and his co-pilots helped to deliver a crushing blow to the heart of the Japanese Navy. Among the Midway Marines, a man who would become the Marine Corps' first ace, Lieutenant Marion E. Carl, whose courage and discipline display the highest ideals of military service.
Each year in northern Wisconsin, folks gather to recreate the fur trade which thrived during the days when America was still mostly wilderness.
What we have here is a rendezvous. And rendezvous is a French name for a meeting place. It's a reenactment, kind of recreation of a time period. The fur traders traded for furs to the Native Americans. And so there was a commerce that was going on in this country from the mid-1600s until the late 1800s. The trappers would be out trapping for the majority of the year. They would rendezvous at a specified place, and the owners of the company would bring supplies in from St. Louis and pick up their furs and take them back to St. Louis with them. We're living history historians, and we do things as it was done in the time period that we're studying so that we can better appreciate that time of history.
It takes many different ingredients to make a nutritious loaf of bread. Alone, these ingredients may not seem like much, but when added together with planning and care, the end product can feed many. Your contribution is an important ingredient of the combined federal campaign. The CFC represents over 500 U.S. agencies serving millions of people worldwide. Your commitment, when combined with that of others, allows the CFC to help those in need. Please, give generously.
Along the Patuxent River of Maryland, some things haven't changed much with the years. But the watermen's homes and the small farms along the river have been joined by growing tracts of suburban homes and the getaway places of people from Washington, D.C. and Baltimore. The broad, salty river, rising and falling with Atlantic tides pushing up from the Chesapeake Bay, is still an important habitat for waterfowl and fish, and for one of the world's most prized crustaceans, the Maryland blue crab. The people of the region have recognized that the water quality and shorelines of the Patuxent and other tidal rivers need protection. With care, the children of the watermen will be able to continue to bring food from the region's waters and to enjoy the natural beauty that has always been part of the Patuxent River.
No matter how hard you try to make good on a bad check, you can't erase the damage done to your credit reputation. Even with all the penalties you pay, bad marks remain on your record. Face the facts. The way to keep your reputation clean is to make sure you have the funds for every check you write.
This phone's taken.
Son, will this help you?
Maybe the last thing you would do for somebody should be the first.
Thanks.
A message from the Credit Union Foundation and your hometown credit union.
Enjoy this very special holiday. Happy Thanksgiving from AFRTS.
1861 to 65. From Vicksburg to Charleston. From Galveston Bay to the Atlantic. Americans were at war with each other. For the first time in our history, the camera was there, recording the misery, the boredom, and the satisfaction. Where the armies marched, the photographers and their wagons were not far behind. Some, like George Barnard, who was sent to follow General Sherman, were under contract with the War Department. Others, like Matthew Brady and his team of assistants, were independent businessmen, selling portraits to the soldiers and stereoscopic views to the folks back home. Today's military photojournalists can trace their history back to these pioneers. Battle scene photography, an American military first from the Civil War.
The all-American image of Uncle Sam. There's a lot of stories about where he came from, but this one appears to be the most accepted. Seems his roots go back to the early 1800s and a real person named Samuel Wilson. Wilson owned a meatpacking company in New York and was nicknamed Uncle Sam because of his friendly personality. During the War of 1812, his company was awarded a government contract to provide meat to the War Department. The crates were stamped U.S. for the United States. But when someone questioned the stamps during an inspection, a meatpacker jokingly told him it stood for Uncle Sam. The story soon spread nationwide, and the kind, elderly Uncle Sam image began to appear in newspapers, cartoons, commercials, and, of course, posters. As times changed, so did Uncle Sam's appearance, but his ability to represent our country has always remained the same. Uncle Sam, one of America's proudest symbols.
Many early American inventors had some interesting ideas on transportation. The railroads got a lot of attention, with items such as the over and under railroad car. As two trains approached on the same track, the cars were designed so one would take the high road and one would take the low road as they chugged on passage. For those riding inside, this handy hammock made for a comfortable ride. By hooking the top and bottom to two train seats, passengers could float along high above the bumps and rattles of the steel rails. And for those who preferred travel by automobile, this useful attachment kept the road ahead free and clear of pedestrians. Instead of a rude horn, the polite driver would simply ask the pedestrian, "Excuse me, madam, I believe you're in my way." It was so much more civilized than the horn. You just had to watch out for those swarms of bugs as you drove. They were all good transportation ideas that needed a little more work back at the drawing board.
The rich treasure of artifacts left to us by Native Americans tell us of a time when man lived in harmony with his environment, a time when ordinary objects were crafted to aid in survival and had a powerful ritual meaning inspired by the spirit world. Through their creations, the Native Americans lived in unity with the spirits and their environment, a people and their culture, recorded for all time in the artifacts of Native Americans.
On the Oregon coast, rising above the pounding Pacific waves, stands Cape Perpetua. Far above the surf towers an evergreen rainforest, nourished by 10 to 12 feet of annual rainfall. As the seasons pass through their cycles, the waves continue their carving action on the cliffs. The cliffs, rising in response to forces deep within the earth, offer a varied resistance to the sea's challenge and the harder remnants of earlier cliffs. On the rocks, despite the pounding seas and the rising and falling of the tide, life goes on. Anemones, urchins, snails and sea stars and mussels thrive in the intertidal zone. And the shorebirds await their share of the bounty. Cape Perpetua, a monument to nature's perpetual motion.
It is a test, not just of strength, but of the power of the mind. And if you complete the journey, you will be changed forever. The few, the proud, the Marines.
This state is a world center for jet aircraft production. It contains rainforests that are so dense they look like tropical jungles, yet it also contains a desert-like region that stretches for miles without a tree. One of the engineering wonders of the world, the Grand Coulee Dam, is located here. It's the largest concrete dam in the nation. In 1980, this state saw the first volcanic activity on the country's mainland since 1921. The force of the eruption blew the top 1,300 feet off the mountain. This state leads the nation in the production of apples and is the only state named after a president. One of its cities is named George, and all of Georgia's streets are named after varieties of cherries. It became our 42nd state in 1889, and its capital is Olympia. Which state is it? It's Washington.
It is one of the most memorable and poignant scenes at Arlington National Cemetery. The flag-draped casket aboard an ammunition wagon pulled by 6 horses. They are part of the Old Guard Caisson platoon based at Fort Myer, Virginia. Most of the men who enter the platoon are not expert horsemen, but infantrymen. Horses and riders train together to learn to work with the caisson. The tradition heralds back to days when the ammunition wagons were often used to remove casualties from the battlefield. Also, a part of the platoon's tradition is the riderless horse, symbolic of the warrior who will never ride again. They've carried the coffins of presidents and privates, of the famous and the unknown, all with pride, all with the solemn military bearing that has become their trademark. They are the caisson platoon of the 3rd United States Infantry.
Millions of dollars are thrown away each year through fraud, waste, and abuse. If you see fraud, waste, and abuse, report it to your immediate superior or contact the DOD hotline.
Precision, discipline, pride. Without a word, the Marine Silent Drill Platoon executes each command with perfection, reflecting the dedication of every member. Armed Forces Ceremonial Units, America's ambassadors of pride.
When you turn it up, you could be turning someone off. The year was 1929, and aviation continued to grow in importance to the American military. Recognizing its potential, Congress authorized the construction of the first aircraft carrier, the USS Ranger. Prior to this, ships were converted to serve as carriers. Advanced technology also enabled the first blind flight to be made, with the pilot depending entirely on instruments for takeoff, level flight, and landing. That same year, Navy Lieutenant Commander Richard Byrd
made the first flight over the South Pole, taking aerial photos to map the route. And after a severe drought, the city of Tacoma, Washington lost its water-dependent electrical power. The U.S. Navy stepped in and used a steamship in Puget Sound to furnish power to the entire city for 30 days, all part of serving our country in 1929.
The Great Lakes were discovered by the French between 1615 and 1669. Our first written record of the name, however, dates to a reference by William Penn in 1683. But one of the most interesting facts about the lakes is how they were named. Lake Superior is named for its size. It's the largest body of fresh water in the world. Huron is named for the Indian tribe of the same name, a word derived from the French for bristly, savage, and unkempt. Michigan is from the Chippewa, Mikagama, meaning big water, while Lake Erie is named after the Erie Indians, an Iroquois word meaning people of the panther. Ontario is also from an Iroquois word meaning fine lake. These are the Great Lakes, each with a unique name and a unique story.
Excited about your first flight?
You bet.
Let's lay out the envelope.
Okay, Dad.
Bet you didn't know the U.S. had an Air Force before the Wright brothers were born.
Before airplanes were invented?
Uh-huh. It all started with Thaddeus Lowe around 1861. He had the crazy idea that the Union Army could use hot air balloons to spy on the enemy.
Did it work?
Well, Lowe was sent on the U.S. Army's first aerial reconnaissance mission.
But what happened?
Well, the wind blew him back and forth over the opposing lines. The Confederates were just curious, but the unknowing Union soldiers fired at him.
They did?
He got the information all right, but he landed in a tree near the enemy. Luckily, he was rescued by his wife, who was disguised as a farm woman driving a wagon.
Dad? You think Mom will have to pick us up in the wagon?
Yeah, the station wagon.
Aerial reconnaissance, an American military first from the Civil War.
Many early American inventors had some interesting ideas on nautical devices. 20 years before Robert Fulton had the idea, steam was used to power a boat. However, instead of a paddle wheel, this vessel was more of a mechanical Viking longboat, driven by 6 paddles on each side. When the paddle wheel finally hit the scene, it was not only attached to steamboats, but also to this 4-wheeled amphibious unit. Driven totally by steam, this 30-foot barge was not only the first working steam dredge, but believe it or not, it was also America's first automobile. And for those who preferred working under the sea, there was the Submarine Explorer unit. The diver would enter the unit through a floating cone and step into the weighted suit. As he descended, the tube, which was sealed to the top of the suit, stretched down with him, keeping the diver's head in an airtight environment. What was not clear was how the diver could see his surroundings once he reached the bottom. They were all good ideas that needed a little more work back at the drawing board.
During the holiday season, the Military Postal Service handles more than double its normal volume of mail. If you want to make sure everything you mail gets there on time, now's the time to plan ahead. So mail your cards and packages early. Follow the holiday deadline suggested by the Military Postal Service.
New York, America's largest city, grew at the great natural harbor formed by the mouth of the Hudson River. The river became a focus of early settlement in North America. Henry Hudson and other explorers hoped this mighty river was the much-sought Northwest Passage. Though it wasn't a way to the Orient, the Hudson's long navigable course made it a busy highway into the continent. But the value of the Hudson was never confined to just the noisy traffic of coal-fired steamships. The river and its valley were so beautiful that a whole generation of landscape painters, known as the Hudson River School, competed in dramatizing its craggy grandeur and misty moods. It's a grand river still, the Hudson, highway of commerce and American scenic wonder.
Recess!
You never outgrow your need for a good recess. It's a relaxing way to relieve stress. Regular aerobic exercise can take your mind off your worries, make you feel invigorated, and give your immune system a boost to help fight stress-related illness. Take a break for exercise.
What is it inside us? Tells us to leave the place we call home. To dare the unknown. To seek what? The passage he sails to find, he does not discover in 1492. Still, it's a miracle of heart and sense and destiny that leads Cristoforo Colombo here, to this place, into history in 1492.
Centuries ago, dentists would use picks and scissors to clean out tooth cavities. Until, that is, 1790, when John Greenwood invented the first foot-powered dental drill. After Greenwood had been a soldier during the Revolutionary War, he chose to study dentistry. He soon established a practice in New York City, where one of his patients was President George Washington. A mechanical genius, Greenwood was always looking for ways to improve dental methods. One day, he took his mother's spinning wheel, which was driven by a foot treadle, and adapted it to his drill, making his hands free to work. This paved the way for today's dental drills, which can now operate at speeds of over 6,000 revolutions per second. And considering what was used centuries ago, this is definitely something worth smiling about. John Greenwood, a story of American ingenuity.
In the Gallery of Heroes, Army Private First Class Joseph Van Osdol has earned a place of honor. Italy, July 17, 1944. Van Osdol's company had to push the Germans back along the Arno River. During a vicious German counterassault, the company radio operator was wounded, and Van Osdol volunteered to take over the radio set. A short time later, he spotted a wounded comrade on an exposed hillside and rose from cover to bring the man to safety. Then, when another company came under attack, Van Osdol moved forward under fire with his radio to provide communications. As a result, the company was able to repulse the German attack. For his bravery, Van Osdol won the Distinguished Service Cross. Army Private First Class Joseph O. Van Osdol, a credit to his service and to all who have fought so bravely.
Wouldn't it be great if everything was right in the world? If the weather was perfect all the time? If everyone had plenty to eat every day? If everyone stayed healthy and there was no suffering? It would be great if everything was right in the world, but it's not. And it's up to all of us to help make it better. Please give generously to the combined federal campaign. You can make a world of difference.
Only one town in the United States has been continuously inhabited for over 900 years. Its story begins 400 years before Columbus began his voyage to the New World, when Native Americans were living on New Mexico's enchanted mesa. In 1075, a frightening earthquake sent them fleeing in search of a new home. They found it on top of a nearby sandstone mesa and built a new Pueblo community. They called it Acoma, which meant close to heaven. And ever since, people have lived in this lovely place. It's a naturally protected area on top of a 357-foot mesa. Originally, it was accessible only by burro or steep ladder trails, but today, it's a much easier place to visit. Acoma, the only town in the U.S. continuously inhabited since the 11th century.
First time I got high was when I was 11 years old. Where does a kid that age get the money to buy drugs? I used to steal from my own parents. If it came between eating lunch at school or buying a joint with my lunch money, I would buy the joint. I couldn't refuse the drug anymore. It was a part of me. I've got to realize that what I've been through, and that I am an addict, and that I am an alcoholic, and that it's time to stop.